Good morning, everyone. Let's try that again. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Perfect.
Hey everyone, Donovan Brown. I'm the Principal DevOps Manager from Microsoft. I have TQ with me today, and he's going to share with us how we do the versioning of the microservices in VSTS. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Donovan. Like you said, my name is TQ. That's what everybody calls me. Tom Quinn is my real name.
Okay.
And I'm one of the architects on VSTS, and among the things I do is manage the REST APIs.
Great, because I've tell the story about how we make the transformation and how we do DevOps with VSTS. And the microservices always come up because they're versioned, we can deploy them in any order. How do they negotiate which other, like if I depend on you and I know we can deploy in different orders, then there's obviously a version there that I need to communicate with, like, wait, what version are you? Can I communicate? And what we were hoping is that you'd be able to share how do we determine when it's time to deprecate? How do we publicly, if we do deprecate a version, say, hey, look, everybody, you got to get off this version by this particular date. And then at the technical level, how do the web services negotiate what version can I use of you? And then how often do they do that negotiation? Because if you eventually do get upgraded, then I want to start taking advantage of the latest version of the API. I'm curious of how all that magic starts to happen.
Sure, we can get into all of that.
Perfect.
Where do we want to start?
I think I want to start with, talk to me about the deprecation, or do we deprecate, and how do we keep them in sync between TFS 2017 and we support 2018 and we have VSTS. It's all the same REST API, right?
Yeah, it's all the same code base, it's all the same REST APIs. And what we do is each major version has a version that's the same across all the services. So I think we're on 4.0 right now, and 4.1 is in preview.
Okay.
And so we have a preview version, and the preview version, you have to specifically go to that one to try it out. And while we're in preview, we let the individual services actually change the resources, and we have a special version on the end called the resource version that actually allows the resources to change things while we're working out the differences in preview.
Interesting.
And then once it's done, once it's released, then that becomes the official version, and there's no more resource version anymore.
Okay, so I've seen the 4.1 preview 1.
Right.
So what part of that is the resource version?
That's the .1 at the end. So you could have a .2, a .3 if you wanted to.
I got you, and that's the resource that we're tweaking, and the first number is the number of...
That's the full API version.
Gotcha.
And so all the APIs have that version.
Right, and then what'll happen is when 4.1 becomes an official version, all that preview stuff just goes away.
And it's just 4.1.
Gotcha.
And we'll have 4.2-preview.1.
Gotcha, for the next version.
Yeah.
So then but if obviously you don't go back and patch 2017, for example, which is still in support. But
That's right.
So the last update was, I think, update 4. Is that the last update for that one?
Yeah, I think so.
Right, so whatever that version of the API is the version that will be for 2017 to the end of time. And then 2018 will get all the new updates after they've been proved out on VSTS. So we prove them out on VSTS, and then we put them down into an update inside of in TFS. Do any previews go to TFS as well?
No, everything in TFS is released.
Gotcha.
So we basically do a new released version every time we release the on-prem product.
All right, so, okay, got it.
4.2 is the latest, or 4.1, 4.0, I guess, is the latest TFS. 4.1 will be the next update, 4.2 the one after that.
Gotcha, and that all coincides with what we've done inside of VSTS up until that point,
the
last 3 months. All right, great. So that's how, so do we actually deprecate the versions, or can I still access version 1.0 inside of VSTS?
There's 1.0 is still in there.
Wow.
And yeah, we basically don't remove anything until we're sure nobody's using it.
Till you're sure, so we don't communicate, hey everyone, you have till January 2019.
We haven't done it yet. We've talked about it occasionally.
Okay.
You know, what if we needed to do that? We haven't needed to do it yet, so we haven't done it.
So we haven't needed to do it. I'm just, in my mind now, I'm thinking, how much technical debt are we carrying now that we have 4 versions of the same API in VSTS?
Well, you know, once it's released, that code just basically sits there, and we do the next version next to it, right? So,
okay.
So it's, you know, there's a bunch of different endpoints sitting on the server, and so we're going to hit them. But we can know by the telemetry that we take if anybody's actually using those endpoints.
Gotcha.
There have been cases where an API got old, nobody was using it anymore, so we could get rid of it. But we've never had to let customers know, hey, we're going to kill this API. We know you're using it. So we haven't had to do that yet. And we've talked about what we could do, but we haven't really done it yet. There have been occasions though during preview where we've changed the resources because we're iterating over them. And so there's been a couple cases where we changed something. A customer was still using the old version, and they weren't necessarily side by side at that point. So we had to communicate with the customers that were using the preview versions. But fortunately, again, from telemetry, we can know who they are.
And also, when you take on a preview version as a consumer, you kind of know. You're kind of opting into the fact that might change from underneath. It's called preview for a reason, right?
Yeah.
But once a API has been released, it never changes.
That's
correct?
Right.
Right.
That's right.
That is we promise it will always be that way.
We don't touch it. Yeah.
Exactly. So it sounds interesting because you said you have these endpoints that are just sitting next to each other. For some reason, when I thought you were versioning it, in my mind, I saw something different. So basically, we cut 4.1. It has now been released. We want to do 4.2. Do you just copy that class and create another class, and this class stays static?
It depends.
Okay.
It depends on how different it is.
Okay.
So, I mean, if, like I said, we have different versions for each version. Now, the same endpoint we might not change it at all from version to version. So that same endpoint could support versions 2, 3, 4, 5, right? And so, that didn't change at all. Also, if the changes are minor, like we've just added an additional field to the result, then we can, inside that function, we can look at it and say, it's 4.0, I'm not going to send this one back. Oh, it's 4.1, I am.
Okay, I've kind of had that feeling with some release management. I've seen some other stuff show up, but I guess you could have handled it that way.
But, between major versions, we could, completely change the shape of the thing. And so then we'll have two controllers that sit side by side that issue different things.
Now, one thing that you mentioned that kind of caught my ear was maybe between these versions nothing changed. Then why did the version change?
Because we keep the version the same across the whole service. So
okay. Because I've been looking, I've only seen Core like 2.0. I didn't know there was a Core 4.0. Like whenever I'm doing stuff with projects, I use your REST API a lot, right? I wrote a PowerShell module that does nothing but encapsulate the REST API. And I actually have a version table in the PowerShell module where you can control what version you want me to call the API with. And even when I'm like playing out of the box, none of them were exactly the same, right? I thought Core was like at 2 and then build was at 4 or something like that. But you're saying that it should be, if there's a 4.0 for build, there's a 4.0 for Core as well.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
And it might be the same as 2.0 though.
Gotcha. Okay, so you're versioning the service as a unit. Okay, I was not aware of that. I'm going to go back and do some research on my own module because it would make my versioning so much simpler. So you're saying I should be able to say, if you're using VSTS, the version for everything is 4.1.
Yeah.
And that version is going to work across everything. Can I send you a REST API call with no version and you default to the latest or no?
Yeah, so yes and no is the short answer to that. So on the gets, we support not sending a version.
Okay.
So, and we do that so you can play around with it in the browser and Fiddler or whatever, right?
Okay.
And so if you don't set a version, we give you the latest released version.
Okay.
So if 4.1 is in preview, you'll get 4.0.
Okay, got it. And also, one of the things that I got taught recently, I think it was Will Smythe. I was IMing him. I'm like, Will, how do I know what versions are out there? Right? He's like, yeah, you got to use an options method. And is that the proper way? But I've also noticed that the options method, I have to call it sometimes multiple times because the user management has a different URL than release management has a different URL than like the core resources, right? So I had to end up calling options multiple times to get all of the versions underneath release management, which was a separate
That's
service.
right, yeah. So the different services have the different registrations for the resources that they serve up.
And the version potentially, right?
Yeah.
See, that might be why I'm confused then, because I'm thinking release management, I'm pretty confident was not at the same version as core. But everything in core, which would have been the root URL for your VSTS, will all be the same. Release management will all be the same. And then user management will all be the same. But they might not all be 4.0. Is that correct?
Well, they all should be get
I
to the
see.
same version, but as you said, we might release them separate in different points. So they might be on different versions for a point in time.
And I think
but eventually we'll get everybody on the same version.
Got it. Okay, and then the other thing that I thought was so the answer to the first question is like, how do we deprecate? We haven't, right?
Yeah.
And blanketly, we have deleted some API versions, but we were able to do that because we have so much telemetry let us know that no one has called version 1.0 in a year.
Right.
Is there a threshold that you look at to see has anyone accessed it in X amount of time before you feel safe deleting it?
Yeah, usually, our telemetry goes back like 60 days by default. Okay. We have, warehouses that hold it longer than that too, of course, but we just usually look at that. And
so if no one's touched it in the last 6,
But it's not like we go in looking for it, somebody will say, hey, I have this old API, I don't want to support it anymore, can we get rid of it?
Gotcha.
And then we'll go do that resource and see if we can. And if people are still using it, we say, no, you can't delete it, people are still using it.
All right, got it. So if I have a tool that I want to keep using, I just need to have like a scheduled job every night, go and call that API so it shows up in your telemetry.
That's right,
So
that would work.
Delete it. So you can never delete my API. All right.
That would do it.
That's interesting. Okay, that's good to know too, because that's one thing that people were asking me a lot, and I honestly didn't know the answer. So that's why I'm so glad that you're here, because when I start talking about our transformation and I start talking about our web services, people's ears pop up, right? They're like, ooh, microservices, we want to do that too. Tell us what you've learned. Tell us how you're doing that. And that's why I wanted to have you come here. And versioning is something that people are really concerned with. And it's interesting to know that our telemetry is our signal on if it's safe to delete a version out. We don't go and communicate. We don't go and give deadlines or ultimatums. We simply say, we're going to support this version until in the last 60 days, in our case, no one's touched that, and then we're just going to pull it. Has there been a scenario where in the last 60 days no one had used it, you pulled it, and then like next week someone tried to hit it?
That hasn't happened, fortunately.
Oh, knock on wood.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. And talk to me about how was this transformation into this microservices world? Because TFS originally was a monolith.
That's right. Yeah.
And then we lifted and shifted it to the cloud. It went horribly bad. And then we started teasing stuff apart. And is that the process that we're in now? Is just taking the monolith and tearing it down?
That's right. Yeah, we're still tearing pieces off.
Sure, absolutely. Because I think like release management was one of the first external services, right?
Yeah, and that one fortunately came in as a separate service.
Right.
So we started that one out as separate.
What about package management?
Same with them.
Right.
They started new, so we started them out separately.
And then same thing with user management. I think also looks like it's completely separate already too, right? Anything that has its own subdomain of VisualStudio.com is its own microservice.
That's right.
So why that schema, right? Why VSRM.visualstudio.com, and I forgot what the other one is for like user management. Why not have them all underneath the same VisualStudio.com WAC, something like release WAC user management? Why putting a subdomain instead?
So we can actually find them.
Versus having to put them all underneath just VisualStudio.com would make deploying them more difficult, or what do you mean by finding them?
Well, I mean, each one of them is a different deployment. It's in a different, service in the cloud.
Got it. So when they have their own subdomain like that, they are deployed independently of everything else, can be versioned independently of everything else.
Yeah.
Okay, got it. And it's the options method that allows release management to know what version of core is available to it, and core to know what version of user management is available to it, because they're going to call options on each other and then see that list of.
That's right.
Okay, so one question that I have about that, so when I was introduced to the options command, I started running it, right? And like again, the PowerShell module that I wrote, you can actually call it and it'll list out this blob of JSON showing you every version. But the versions don't have any previews on them.
That's right.
So how do I know what preview I'm even available to? So let's go into some code here so that we can see what's going on here.
Bring my computer back alive here.
Perfect.
Let's see here. All right, so
we might need to zoom in a little bit if that's the JSON there.
I actually have one of the results of the options open here.
Okay.
Can you read that?
A little small. I think it's control.
Can we zoom it?
Yeah, you can. I think it's control plus.
Okay.
Control plus.
Where's plus?
On your keyboard. It's right there. Just click that. I think it should go up one each time. There you go. There you
There
go.
we go.
All right.
Let me get this out of the way. And so basically, each one of these describes a resource,
Right.
right? And the ID, which I'll show you what this is used for. Each resource has its own GUID.
Okay.
The area is the first segment after APIs, and then the resource name is the next segment after that. And as you can see in the template, they show up in here.
Yep.
And then in this one below here, there's the area, there's the resource, and then there's something else called subject descriptor. So that gets filled in by the caller. And what this route template does is tell the caller what it needs to fill in to call the API.
How would I know on the one that you have selected now what in the heck a subject descriptor is?
Well, you wouldn't necessarily,
All right.
unless it's you're reading the documentation. But we have clients that get generated for all these, and the clients know how to fill those things in.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, because I use your API raw like this. So when I want to go implement something else, I basically am calling this, going back to the docs and figuring out how can I wrap it in PowerShell to go make it easier for us to use who don't want to just go to Fiddler and Postman and stuff like that. And sometimes I'm like, okay, I don't know what the hell that thing is, and then I have to go to the docs, and that's where I get it.
Exactly.
Okay, got it.
And then we have the versions down here, right? And so there's a min version, a max version, and a release version, but that one says 0.0, so that doesn't really help at all.
No, and I've seen that several times, and also the fact that it seems, so I'm assuming that this resource didn't exist until 3.2.
That's right.
Right, that's why there's no 1.0 here, is because in 3.2 we introduced this new API. And
now, resource version 1 is the resource version of the preview, which is 4.1. So I guess...
Oh, so whenever I see 4.1 preview 1, it's that the one that the number I get after the preview is the resource version.
That's right.
Okay.
Now,
is that only for the max version, or can I have min version 3.2 preview 1?
No, you can't. It's only for the max version. Like I said, once it's released, it's done, and it's just 3.2.
Got it. Okay, got it. So anything between 3.2 and 4.0 is just no preview on it. Got it.
See if I can find one. Yeah,
that's not a one.
This one has release version 4.0 and then max version 4.1. So you can tell from this one at least that the 4.0 is the official version.
Yes.
And 4.1 is max, so it's greater than that.
Right. And can I also assume for this that there's actually a 1, 2, and a 3?
Yes.
I can assume that. Okay. Right. So there will be a major version. There would never be a scenario where there's a 1 and then I jump to 3.
That's right.
Okay, got it. And then what I would be able to run as what I'm looking at now is a 4.1 preview 1 on that resource that we just talked about. And then one above it, I could run a 4.1 preview 3.
Yes.
Now, is preview 1 and 2 also available to me?
Maybe.
Yeah, because what's funny is when I was playing with this, and I first tried this, I went and I said, okay, cool, the max version is 4.1. And then when I ran the command, it says, you got to tell me what preview you want. I'm like, but it doesn't say that. But now you've cleared that up for me. The preview comes from the resource version,
yes,
which I was completely unaware of, which is great. Okay.
Yeah, and so by maybe, I mean, we may still have 1 and 2 sitting around, or we may have gotten rid of them.
And because they're preview, you're under no obligation to keep them around.
Yeah, and we will check the telemetry too to make sure that people stopped using it.
All right. Oh, okay, I got you. So that's a scenario too where, but you would never change the shape of preview 2. Once preview 2 makes it, is preview 2. Once I can hit it, it's preview 2, and that's going to stay that way. And if you change it, it's going to become preview 3.
That's right.
All right, got it. So I can pre-promise. Because I remember I had a chat with Brian Harry once, and he says, our contracts never change, right? That was like a mandate, right? The contract will never change, and that's what you're confirming for me now is like, yeah, the contract will never change. We might delete it if you're not using it frequently enough in the last 60 days, but it will not change. Yeah, this has been helpful.
And believe me, Brian hears about it if we break something.
I bet he does.
Occasionally we do accidentally break something. We're human. And he'll hear about it, and if he hears about it, I hear about it.
So have you ever had to put a version back or like restore something?
Well, we've had to fix things for sure.
Gotcha.
He's gotten emails from customers who said, hey, how come this API works this way and this API works that way? Or these two types are confusing to me. Why are they like that? I like to say, Brian gets an email, I get a work item. You know?
Makes perfect sense. Okay, so I'm actually gonna nag for just 1 second.
Sure.
Right. So whenever I'm doing this type of work, what I've noticed is that if I want to write code for VSTS and I want to write code for TFS, TFS is not always at 4.1 preview 1. So, but the documentation that I find in docs.microsoft.com is only the latest version. How am I supposed to go learn how to use the API that's in TFS 2017 and TFS previous of 2018 when the docs only show me the latest version of the API?
That's a good question.
All right, so we need to work on that after the show.
Yeah, we do.
All right,
We do.
good, because that
Because you're absolutely right. We should have, for any released version that's, of TFS, we should keep the documentation around.
Yeah, because
if it's not around, I don't know where it went.
Exactly, because I write a tool that works on TFS 2017, 18, and VSTS, and it's a challenge for me to be able to go and find out, well, hell, how do I get this to work in TFS 2017 and VSTS when all I can see is the API for VSTS? And calling that, first of all, the version doesn't even exist, right? So thank God the options was there, so I could at least know what version I could use for TFS 2017. But here I am in Postman and Fiddler now, and trying to figure out how I get this stuff to work correctly. So yeah, documentation that actually said, choose what version of TFS or VSTS you want, because we support 1 through 4.
Yeah.
Right. I should be able to hit anything that you support. So
That's
yeah,
right.
let's work on that. I'll be more than happy to help with that.
Yeah, definitely.
As a CDA team as well. All right, cool. So now we know how I can go and find out what is available, and I can find out the shape of the URL,
Now,
the template, and what versions.
You mentioned that you call this yourself. Now,
I do.
This API is not intended to be human readable, of course.
Oh, for sure.
It's there for us to do the negotiation internally.
Okay, so
right?
show us how that works.
So let me go back to, let's see here. We'll go to this guy. So we generate these clients from the source, right? So if you have a REST API, and then we have a new API called the Graph API for identities. And so we generate the Graph API client from the source of the server.
Okay.
Right, and so it figures out, what the APIs are and what to put in there. And there's attributes on the controller that dictate a lot of this stuff, right?
Okay.
So this GUID here is the resource version. It matches those GUIDs that we saw in the file.
Yep.
And then this is one of those parameters that gets filled in as the route value.
Okay.
Right. And so we know the method, we know the GUID, we know the values, and so we just call this method, which is on the base class. And this is the kind of result that's going to get out of it, right? So
Got it.
all that can be generated, and here's your resource version too, 4.1 preview 1. So all the clients have a version coded into them.
Okay.
So if you get a NuGet package with our clients in it, it's always going to use that version. It's never going to get anything different than that.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's one of the things I allowed people to do as well, is that I had, in the PowerShell module, there is a VSTS version table, and I have core broken out, our release manager broken out, and user management, and you can tell me these are the versions, like literally down to the preview that I want you to use when you call that API. So I give them a little bit more flexibility than being forced to use whatever the client is, because I don't know what you want to do with this stuff, right? So I'll let them control that, but it also gets really tricky because they can then set that to an invalid value, right? They can set it to 5.0, and I'm just going to basically blow up and say, hey,
Yeah,
look,
that's not going to work.
exactly, it's not going to work for.
So all this stuff then goes up through this common base class called VS-HTTP client base.
Okay.
And so the base class has all this common logic in it. And so you have this send async method that it called, and it passed in all that data, as you can see. And then that calls this create request message. So it uses that data to create the request message that it then just sends over the wire.
Got it.
And that is here. Right, and so that calls this get resource location async, right? So that's the thing we were talking about. That's the options request. So
okay.
I think that's here. Yeah, there we go. So let me scroll to it here. Yeah, so you can see the HTTP method options, and the options URI. So it calls that. You get back that list of stuff. And it only calls it once.
And it passes in the ID, right? Does it filter?
Yeah,
Okay,
and
got it.
then it uses the try get location by ID, right?
Got
So
it.
it looks at, it has that big table, loads it into memory, then set into a big dictionary, and then it uses that
To
GUID
filter
to
out
find
going
the
on.
thing,
Yep, got it.
right? So then you get back an object that represents that location.
Okay, and then you just use like normal.
Yeah, they call it an API resource location,
Got it.
right? And then it calls that create request message with that data, and that ends up calling this negotiate version, right? So you have the location, you have the resource version, and then we negotiate what version to use. So what the logic for that is, where to go? Stupid scroll bar.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah, so basically this is the logic for that, right? So if the location min version is greater than the version you're asked for, then that's never going to work, right?
Okay.
Whatever the version, you're asking for a version that doesn't exist, basically.
Got it.
If the location max version is less than the version that you're asking for, then we have to negotiate down. So
Okay.
it finds the highest max version that's available for that guy. So if you ask for 5, but 4.0 is the only one available, then you're going to get 4.
Got it.
And then otherwise, we get you the one you want. So then that's when the preview stuff comes into play, right?
So okay, so I can ask for 5 even though it doesn't exist yet, and I'll get 4. Right, but do I know I'm getting 4? Do you give me any like, hey Donovan, just FYI, you asked for 5, but I'm going to give you 4, or do I just get a response back?
You just get a response back.
Interesting. So
Yeah.
if I was expecting more values to be in there, and this could be a scenario where I called VSTS and then I turn around and use the same call to TFS, and that version 5, because at some point version 5 will be in VSTS.
That's right.
And if I were to turn around and make that same call to TFS 2018 update 2, then all of a sudden I'm going to get a 4.0 response back. And my
That's
code
right.
has to just know by the shape of the JSON that it gets that it didn't get a 5.0 response. For example, 5.0 has more.
That's right.
data.
So what happens then is we serialize that data into the requested object, and as long as so JSON fortunately is very loosey goosey.
Yeah, it's
like
very
that.
forgiving.
And
yeah.
so it doesn't require things to be there necessarily. So
Sure.
as long as we can fill in some of the properties, it's fine.
And so you mentioned something about you serialize in the data. So is there somewhere in a header or something the version that I actually got the response from? What did you mean by you serialize in some of the
No,
data?
the JSON is a blob of
Yeah.
text, and then we just use a formatter, a piece of code
Oh, okay.
that turns that into the object.
Got it. Okay, I was wondering if there was a way where I asked for 5, I'm getting response from 4. Is there anything in my response that lets me know that it was a 4.0 response and not a 5.0 response? Is there anything in the headers or anywhere that I could go and say, what version did I actually get the response
I
from?
don't think so.
Okay.
Off the top of my head.
Okay.
It's possible, but I don't think so.
All right, cool. Because if so, I would like to add that to make sure I dump that information for people. But
Yeah.
I don't think I do. Okay, I don't think I noticed anything in there.
But yeah, so like I said, the API version is here. Then we've got it looks and sees what the release version. If the release version is less than the API version, then it's preview. And so I realize now what that 0.0 means in all those places.
Okay.
It means it's never been released.
Got
We've
it.
never had an official version of that API yet.
Even though we're at 4.0,
Yeah.
interesting. So how in the world does that happen?
So it means it's always it hasn't been officially released yet. We haven't had an
Yeah,
official
okay, I
version.
see. Exactly. It's never been officially released, but you are updating its major version to match everyone else in
That's
the
right.
package that it's in.
That's
Got it. Because everything needs to have the same version.
And that version across the board basically happens all at the same time. There's one guy will go into the tree, change the major version,
Got
and then
it.
everybody gets it.
Got it. Even if I haven't been released yet. And then what is that? How do I then flag myself as I am now officially released to where that number gets updated?
That's a good question. I can't remember off the top of my head. There's some, I believe it's in the version attribute on the controller. That
Gotcha.
says released version.
Gotcha.
And so you would just change that to 4.0 instead of 0.0.
Got it, whatever the latest version is at that particular time. Okay, got it. Interesting. So, in recap, because I think we've covered the majority of my code. Was there anything else that you wanted to show us here? because I wanted to know how we deprecate. We deprecate basically on telemetry. We don't have to communicate it. We just basically look until no one's using it and we drop it. We now have been able to look at the options and determine what preview version we're in, what release version we're in, min and max. You got to show us the negotiation here. And it's interesting because when...
And this is a class that parses that string and turns it into the resource version, right? So
okay.
It basically, looks at the string, looks for the dash, and says, okay, is this a preview? Yes, it is. And it looks for the dot, and it pulls the resource version out of that. So it's just a standard format that we use.
Yeah, because I've noticed that too. I just never knew what the preview version was going to be because I didn't know that it was part of the release, which is good to know. So I can build those in the future if I want to from the resource that I get back. And no, I think this is what I was really curious about. And how do we decide when it's time to tease apart another portion of the monolith? And how do you know who goes next? Like, will it be build or work item tracking or something like that?
That's a good question. I mean, it's really kind of, what work do people have to do and how important it is, right? So we've been talking about, splitting up. So the main monolith has 4 services in it. It has version control, work item tracking, build, and test case management.
Yeah, that's right, okay.
And so we've been talking about ripping one of those out for years. But, there's always something ahead of it, right? There's always some bigger feature that, it's one of those, it ain't broke, don't fix it kind of things. But, as you said, we really want to do it. And so one of the teams, I believe, is going to come out not too long from now, fairly soon. But, we're probably not going to do anything like that until after the build conference, because we have a bunch of new features coming out there.
For sure.
Which people will be excited about.
Understood. I think like the main reason to break it out is just flexibility, right? Because if we need more build resources, unfortunately, we now have to spin up more work item, more test, and we don't even need it. Right? That's not really what we need. We need more build, and being able to break it out into a microservice allows us to scale up the build part without paying the penalty of scaling up work item tracking, test, and version
That's
control.
Exactly right. That's what we want to be able to do, is to scale them separately. Now, of course, as you mentioned, when we built these in the first place, it was all one thing. And so, there's work items in builds, and there's build references in work items, and there's work items in pull requests, and et cetera. And so all that stuff is fairly tightly coupled on the server side. And so basically what they would have to do is change from calling server-to-server methods to going through the REST APIs as well.
Sure.
And so all that stuff exists. It's just work. Right?
Gotcha. And before we had, and this might be going a little, if you're uncomfortable answering this is fine, but now that we have Windows containers, is that something that the VSTS team and the web services team, I'm thinking microservices and containers almost go hand in hand.
Yes, we've been working with them very closely. And I'm not sure if we have anything officially out on that, but we definitely have been working on getting things out. We've done at least one of the smaller side services, played with it and gotten it working, but we haven't really gotten to the place where we can use everything yet. That we run into a problem, maybe the Windows containers doesn't support all of the APIs that we're using yet, and so we work with the Windows team, then it comes in, and then we try that out, and then we run into the next thing. And so we've been through that cycle a few times now. It's getting close.
Good.
So and we definitely want to do that too, because what we call COGS, which cost of goods sold.
So exactly.
Which is kind of a weird name for it, but it costs us money to run the service, and so containers would definitely save us a lot of money, especially for some of the smaller services. We could definitely save a lot of money running them in containers.
Awesome. And also, when you think about microservices as well, would you say that what we're doing is like a pure microservices architecture, because it's supposed to have its own separate data store and like completely, is it that far, or is it we have web APIs that we've done it, but they all hit the same like SQL database at the end of the day, right? Which wouldn't I don't believe would be what argued as pure microservices.
Yeah, no, each of our Each of our independent services has their own data.
So like
layer.
release management and, okay, got it. So those that have already been teased apart are pure Microservices Own Datastore, okay, got it. I wasn't aware of
Now
that.
the interesting thing is, of course, we have to put it all back together for on-prem, right? So.
Oh, that's a good point.
And so we have it set up in such a way that each service has a connection string to their database. On-prem, it's just the same string.
But it still could be separate databases in the same SQL server, technically, right?
It could be, yeah.
Yeah, but you just chose not to do it that way.
Yeah, it's just, it's so we also have to support the previous customers. They upgrade. If we start splitting up their databases, that just makes the upgrade harder.
Gotcha. Fair enough. Understood. And from what I understood, like 90% of the code is the same.
Yeah.
Okay, that's amazing code reuse from an on-prem product to a 24/7 microservice product too. It's amazing. All right,
so that's one of the problems that makes it hard to split up the monolith.
No, understood. I can imagine that as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have you back, right? Because we talked about the versioning, we talked about the negotiation, but we haven't talked about how we deploy it. And I think one of the powerful things about the way that we have the negotiation is I can now deploy in any order that I want.
Yes.
Right? Even if I depend on you, I can go first. And the negotiation is going to be like, I'm asking for 5, but you're giving me back 4. And as soon as you're 5, you're going to start giving me back 5, right?
That's right.
Work. And that's really good because the way I thought the negotiation worked wasn't quite the way that it worked. I thought I would ask first, like, tell me what all your versions are, and then I'd be pissed, like, man, you're not at 5 yet? Damn it, okay, fine, I'm going to call you with a 4. But I don't do that. I call you with my desire, and then you give me back the best that you can.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
And we keep the contracts, the data types, what's the word?
Compatible?
Compatible. I don't know how I can forget compatible. Compatible is the word. But yeah, we keep them compatible so that nothing will break, as far as that goes.
Yeah, because I noticed that when I think it was release management was where I wasn't getting back some little bit of data, like in one version. Like it was like I wasn't getting back the notification or something, right? And if you just change the version, the code would get this like, oh, now I know like it's pending or whatever. Like it was like, I think it might even a new state or something. Like there's like a new state was introduced, and I would never get that state if I called the old API. But when I called the new API on the exact same guy, all of a sudden I would get more information. And so it's kind of neat how, again, they are compatible. I didn't break. I just got more data if I used the right API. Well, TQ, was awesome to talk to you. Again, I would love to have you back because I know the questions that we're going to get is, well, I want to know how you deploy them too, because I talked to Manil about our deployment and our ring deployment, and I know that we do multiple deployments a day, and I'm kind of curious of how this stuff plays in there. So I'd love to have you back if you could do that. Awesome. So thanks everyone for watching. I hope that was informative, and we'll see you next time. Thanks.
Good morning, everyone. Let's try that again. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Perfect.